After nearly 2 years of waiting, EA Sports UFC 3 is finally here, and mixed martial art fans are just as excited as ever to get their hands on the latest installment of the biannual franchise. Each release has brought with it new features and options to the series that are expected to improve the game from the previous installment. But there are many that remain on the fence when it comes to making the $60 purchase. I'm Mike from Sports Gamers Online, and here are the 10 things you need to know before buying UFC 3. Let's start with one of the major marketing points of the game, the new mechanics. In UFC 3, the game features a number of new striking mechanics that will see more accurate punches and power being determined in part by the range of the attempt. In addition to that, movement while striking is now possible with the new system. Players will be able to throw jabs while falling away, or even attempt an uppercut while moving to the side of an opponent. Some players may find landing big shots more difficult than UFC 2, but it's much more rewarding when a solid hit is landed. Speaking of mechanics, let's move from striking over to grappling. Now, for all the changes made to the striking system, there are none done to the grappling. The minigame-like submission and clinch game returns, which is certain to turn off some fans from buying who are hoping for a major change. Of course, if you despise the current submission system, you can always choose the simplified version that turns it into a timed button press system. Next, let's talk about the massive roster. With over 230 fighters to choose from, UFC 3 creates the potential for a nearly limitless amount of fights to make. While you can have a flyweight take on a heavyweight yet, there are so many dream matchups to create that you could spend hours upon hours just having fun in the Fight Now mode without touching anything else. Of course, with a game like this, you expect it to look good as well, and UFC 3 is like watching the real thing. Now, one thing that EA Sports has never been afraid to showcase is a game's presentation, and this game is no exception. From the fans in the arena to the fighter walkouts to their in-cage mannerisms, UFC 3 aims to be the best presented MMA game ever released, and it may very well be hard to argue against that point. Next, we need to talk about something that's often controversial with gamers, and that's microtransactions. But in this case, it's a bit of good news because microtransactions in UFC 3 aren't going to be game-breaking. Now, whenever a new game comes out, one of the first things players are concerned about is the impact that microtransactions will have in the experience. Luckily for us, UFC 3 doesn't see them become too imposing for fans. While they are obviously a big part of Ultimate Team, this is the only mode where you'll really see an impact. Everything you purchase in your career mode, for example, must be earned within the mode itself rather than bought. Now, we all know that Microsoft and Sony put out the Xbox One X and the PS4 Pro to get fans to enjoy the power that the new consoles can have when it comes to visuals. Now, with UFC 3, however, the game will run at just a base 30 frames per second on the base Xbox One and PS4 consoles, but if you do have those aforementioned newer systems, the game will be able to play with glorious 60 frames per second. That being said, if you choose to have the game rendered at a higher resolution on the newer systems, like the Xbox One X, the frame rate will be capped at just 30 frames per second. So it's something you need to consider if you only care about seeing the Xbox One X or the PS4 Pro run games at the highest quality. Up next, let's talk about one of the many new modes in UFC 3, Tournament Mode. Now, there are plenty of other modes to talk about in the game, but one that stands out right away is the new Tournament Mode. Players are able to set up a bracket-based tournament that can be fully customized with any number of fighters and rounds. And the big selling point of the new mode is that fighters who move through the various rounds will see damage and fatigue carry over, making strategy within the fights even more meaningful than ever before. And if the new tournament mode isn't your cup of tea, then UFC 3 should have something to keep you entertained. In fact, it's pretty much got a mode for everyone. From the knockout mode featuring Snoop Dogg with some of the most hilarious commentary you'll ever hear in a fighting game, to Ultimate Team, to the ability to customize matches with your own rules, UFC 3 is by far the deepest in the series when it comes to game mode offerings for fans. In keeping with the various modes in the game, let's talk about Ultimate Team. After debuting in UFC 2, Ultimate Team is receiving a much desired update in this year's game. Last edition, you were only able to have created fighters as part of your team, but in UFC 3, you'll now be able to collect real stars of the octagon and form the best team possible. In addition to adding real fighters to your team, UFC 3 also adds solo challenges to the mode for those that don't always want to go against real people online. Lastly, UFC 3 allows players to become the greatest of all time. By far the biggest addition to the series, the new GOAT career mode sees you take a fighter from a virtual nobody to a UFC Hall of Famer. The new take on career mode will see players take part in promotions to hype a fight, work to gain a fan base, and even fight to earn better and more lucrative contracts with the UFC. Career mode has been much maligned through the first two releases, and EA Sports is banking on the new GOAT career to change all of that. Now, what are you looking forward to about UFC 3? Let us know in the comments section below, and be sure to keep it locked to Sports Gamers Online for more great UFC content.